Amara Santos thought she was marrying a prince, but on her wedding night in Dubai's most luxurious hotel, she discovered she'd been sold for 3 million dirhams, and before sunrise, the powerful sheikh who bought her was dead.
The crime scene presents a new page of crime, a new mystery, a new shock case.
Amara Santos had always believed that fate had finally smiled on her when Sheikh Rashid Al Mansour entered her life like a desert storm wrapped in silk. She was a 25-year-old Filipina working long shifts at a luxury hotel in Dubai, juggling dreams and debts, when the Sheikh's entourage started frequenting the lobby. Rashid noticed her immediately. Her grace, her quiet smile, her innocence that stood out amid the city's glittering chaos. Soon, the gifts started arriving. Diamond bracelets, designer handbags, envelopes with cash that could feed her family for months. To Amara, it felt like a fairy tale spinning to life, a poor girl being rescued by a man of power. Her mother back home cried tears of joy when she heard the news of the engagement, convinced that her daughter had finally found love and security. But beneath the polished surface, something darker lurked. The sheikh was not known for compassion. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Rumors of missing ex-wives, abandoned lovers, and secret settlements trailed behind his name like smoke after a fire. Yet no one dared to question him, not even those closest to him. His fortune and influence built walls too high to climb. Amara ignored the unease crawling in her gut as wedding preparations began at a desert resort known for hosting royalty. Everything sparkled, from the chandeliers to the diamond-studded gown fitted just for her. But as she walked through the massive halls of Rashid's palace, she couldn't shake off the feeling that the marble floors beneath her feet were too cold, too perfect, too quiet. Every smile felt rehearsed, every servant's glance filled with unspoken warning. Her life was about to change forever, but not in the way she imagined. Behind every luxury was a price she hadn't yet discovered. 3 days before the wedding, Amara's fantasy began to crumble like sand slipping through her fingers. While walking past the sheikh's private study, she overheard a conversation between Rashid's older brother and one of his business associates. They spoke casually, like men discussing livestock, mentioning her name followed by the words 3 million dirhams and payment confirmed. The words hit her like a slap, echoing in her mind as she froze behind the gilded door. A cold realization crawled up her spine. She hadn't been chosen for love or admiration. She had been bought, sold like an item in a silent auction. Her so-called agent, her employer's cousin who had introduced her to Rashid, wasn't helping her climb the social ladder. He was cashing in on her life. That night, Amara sat in her suite, staring at the engagement ring that now felt like a shackle. Every sparkle mocked her. Rage and disbelief collided inside her chest, but she couldn't afford to let it show. The palace was filled with guards who reported to Rashid, cameras hidden in corners, and servants whose eyes told her they knew far more than they'd ever say. She began noticing the details she had ignored before. Doors that locked from the outside, women's perfumes lingering in empty rooms, framed photos of past brides who had vanished from public life. Each piece added to the puzzle, painting a terrifying picture of the man she was about to marry. She practiced smiling in the mirror, her face a mask of perfection, while her mind planned escape routes. Fear whispered that there was no way out, but pride screamed louder. She wasn't going to be another trophy on his shelf. Not this time. Not for 3 million dirhams. The wedding day arrived wrapped in gold and deceit, a spectacle so grand it made headlines across Dubai. Every corner of the desert resort glittered under chandeliers, while cameras captured every move of the sheikh's new bride. Amara moved like a doll on strings, her smile flawless, her heart heavy with the truth she could never reveal. The gown she wore shimmered like moonlight, its weight pressing on her like the chains of her own captivity. Guests whispered about her beauty, about how lucky she was to marry a man as powerful as Sheikh Rashid Al Mansour. No one saw the terror behind her eyes. Rashid played his part perfectly, the charming billionaire, his hand resting on her waist like a claim of ownership. Every time he spoke of her as his jewel, her stomach twisted with disgust. The ceremony was broadcast live to the world, but to Amara it felt like a performance in a gilded prison. Beneath the blaring music and flashing cameras, she noticed strange details: the security guards stationed too close, the women in black veils watching silently from the shadows, and the way Rashid's brother never smiled once. As the night deepened, fireworks lit up the desert sky, reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. She excused herself from the celebration, seeking air, but what she found instead stopped her heart cold. Near the servants' corridor stood a familiar face, a woman she knew from her hotel job months ago, someone who had suddenly disappeared without a trace. Her eyes were blank now, her posture submissive, like she was no longer alive inside. Amara realized then that she wasn't the first bride Rashid had purchased, only the latest in a long line of victims dressed in silk and diamonds. The fairy tale was a farce, and her wedding was a warning written in gold. When the final song faded and the last guest departed, Amara found herself standing inside the penthouse suite of the Burj Al Arab, the city lights shimmering beneath her like a sea of diamonds mocking her fate. The room smelled of expensive perfume and polished marble, but underneath the luxury there was a coldness that made her skin crawl. Rashid poured himself a drink, his arrogance filling the silence, while Amara's eyes caught something on the bedside table: a gold envelope with her name embossed on it. Curiosity turned to dread as she opened it, revealing a legal contract declaring that she was now the legal property of the Al-Mansour family, her name already signed on the dotted line. Her breath caught in her throat, realizing the papers had been forged long before she had even said, "I do." Panic clutched her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. When Rashid stepped away to answer a call, she moved quickly, searching his briefcase for answers. What she found inside nearly made her collapse. Dozens of photos and files, each marked with a woman's name, nationality, and price tag. Filipina, Ukrainian, Moroccan, each bride purchased like luxury merchandise. Amara's hands trembled as she flipped through them, the faces of missing women staring back at her like ghosts. Every story ended abruptly, the final page stamped "closed." She realized the mansion, the lavish wedding, the show of affection, none of it had been real. She was just another acquisition in his empire of secrets. Rage simmered beneath her fear, a storm waiting to erupt. When Rashid returned, smiling smugly, she hid the documents and forced a perfect smile. He thought she was naive and harmless. But behind her calm eyes, a deadly decision was already forming. Tonight would not end the way he planned. Rashid returned to the suite reeking of alcohol and dominance, his arrogance thick enough to choke on. The sound of his laughter filled the room, sharp and cruel, as he loosened his cufflinks and looked at Amara with the hunger of a man who believed he owned everything he touched. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her face remained calm, a mask of obedience hiding the fury beneath. The ceremonial dagger hanging on the wall caught her eye, a relic of the Al-Mansour bloodline, its blade silver and cruel, the kind of weapon that once sealed fates. As he approached her, demanding submission, something inside her snapped. Every humiliation, every lie, every stolen piece of her freedom crashed down like waves in a storm. Her hands trembled not with fear but with resolve. When he grabbed her arm, the world blurred into a single heartbeat. She reached for the dagger, her fingers closing around the cold metal, and with a surge of desperation and rage she drove it into his chest. The sound of steel meeting flesh was sickening, yet liberating. Rashid's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening but no words escaping, only a wet gasp as blood spread across his pristine kandura. Amara stood frozen, watching life drain from the man who had destroyed hers. The silence that followed was almost sacred, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Her heartbeat slowed as the weight of what she'd done settled over her like smoke. But instead of regret, there was peace. Pure, cold peace. She had taken back what had been stolen, her power, her will, her life. As she dropped the dagger beside his lifeless body, the diamonds on her wrist glinted red, reflecting the price of freedom she had finally paid in blood. The moment the Sheikh's body hit the floor, Amara's instincts took over. She didn't think, she just moved. Her once white wedding gown was soaked in blood, the silk clinging to her like a ghost of what she'd been forced to become. She tore off the veil, wiped her trembling hands on the sheets, and scanned the room for anything that could help her escape. Her reflection in the mirror looked nothing like the naive bride from hours ago. Her eyes were wild, her face pale but fierce. She stripped off the stained gown and slipped into one of Rashid's robes, tucking her hair under a scarf. The security cameras would soon show everything, so she had minutes, maybe less. She grabbed the Sheikh's wallet, a keycard, and his phone, walking out of the penthouse like she belonged there. The guards at the elevator bowed their heads as she passed, none daring to question the figure they believed was Rashid's new wife. Once in the lobby, she headed for the private garage, heart pounding against her ribs. She found the keys to his black SUV and drove out through the service exit, tires screeching as she disappeared into the endless desert night. The lights of Dubai faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the haunting stillness of the dunes. She drove until the fuel gauge blinked red, until exhaustion blurred her vision. Finding an abandoned workers' camp half buried in sand, she hid inside, wrapping herself in a dusty blanket. Her hands shook as she replayed the night in her head. The dagger, the blood, the silence. Fear crawled up her spine, but beneath it was something stronger. Relief. She wasn't free yet, but for the first time, she wasn't someone's property. She was the storm that refused to die quietly. For days, the desert swallowed Amara whole, the dunes stretching endlessly beneath the burning sun, each hour blurring into the next. News of Sheikh Rashid Al Mansour's death had exploded across every media outlet, and her face now flashed on every screen from Dubai to Manila, the killer bride of the Emirates. Police drones scoured the sands, checkpoints locked down every road, and private investigators offered millions for any clue to her whereabouts. But Amara was no longer the same woman they were hunting. She'd shed her fear like the wedding dress she left behind. With the Sheikh's stolen cash and a few pieces of jewelry hidden in her robe, she managed to barter for water, fuel, and silence from a smuggler passing through the desert's edge. Rumors later claimed she crossed into Oman under a fake identity. Others swore she boarded a fishing boat to India. But the truth was far stranger. Weeks later, international journalists received an anonymous email titled, "The Brides of the Sheikh." Attached were files, photos, and financial records, proof of a human trafficking network run by Rashid and his associates, complete with names of officials and businessmen who had paid millions for wives. The evidence was irrefutable, shaking Dubai's elite to their core. The scandal triggered raids, arrests, and public outrage, forcing the government to acknowledge the dark underbelly of the city's glamour. But the sender's identity remained a mystery. The only clue was the signature at the bottom of the message: Amara S. No one ever saw her again. Some say she vanished into the desert, others believe she started a new life under another name. But in every whispered story told by workers and maids across the Gulf, she became a legend, a symbol of rebellion against the men who bought women's freedom with gold.